I'm Leah Lane, an award-winning travel writer and author of Places I Remember, Tales, Truths, Delights from 100 Countries. On this podcast, we share conversations with travelers about fascinating destinations and memorable experiences around the world. In this episode, we're talking with Millie Ball, former travel editor of the Times-Picayune, and her hometown is New Orleans. Welcome, Millie.
Hello, Lee. Good to be here.
So tell us something first about the history of New Orleans.
Well, it's a quirky city, and maybe even its discoverers or its first settlers set the path for it, because it was Bienville and his brother Iberville, and they came up the Mississippi River. They were supposed to stop. They were supposed to settle somewhere near Baton Rouge, but they decided no, that the crescent of the Mississippi River was a better spot. But it was filled with mosquitoes and swamp, and they had convicts having to get snakes and all of this high grass out. But it turned out to be a good spot in the long run, because it was a good spot. It was nearer to the Gulf of Mexico, so shipping and trade could come through. Yes.
Well, it's called the Crescent City, I guess, for that reason. There are lots of names for New Orleans, but I know you call it NOLA. Is that the way to say it when you're a real New Orleans person?
No, we really don't. We say that to make it short in typing something, but there are different pronunciations. My mother always called it New Orleans, Y-U-N-Z. I say New Orleans or New Orleans. Nobody says New Orleans unless you're singing. You know what it means to miss New Orleans. And also nobody says Nolans, which you also see people who are hosts of shows who really don't know New Orleans. They'll say, oh, it's Nolans. No, it isn't. Nobody here says that. So we have our own languages, and it all depends upon sort of what part of the city you live in. You know?
What are some of the neighborhoods? I know there are many of them that are very interesting.
There are totally many. There's Orleans Parish, which is a blue spot in the middle of a red state. It's a very democratic city, but the suburbs tend to be more suburbs that would be across Lake Pontchartrain, St. Tammany Parish, and Jefferson Parish on this side of Lake Pontchartrain would be like conservative types. But then in the city itself, we have the lower Ninth Ward, which was badly flooded in Katrina. And we have Chalmette, and we have Uptown, we have Downtown, we have Faubourg Marigny, we have Bywater, just so many.
Lots of personality. Speaking of Katrina, I know that was a big comeback, but New Orleans has come through many problems. I know it was hit by fire in 1788, and that flattened 80% of the French Quarter. There was yellow fever and multiple hurricanes, but you always come back. It's got spirit.
We do. It used after Katrina. There's some people in Washington. You know how we feel about them sometimes. They would say, well, it's not worth bringing this city back. Too many things happen, and everybody in New Orleans went, we don't feel that way at all. This is a city that cares. And the first Mardi Gras after Katrina, which was August 29th in 2005. Was one of the best we ever had, and the first Jazz Fest that year. I know Bruce Springsteen came down, all these top people came and sang, and there's a sense of, it's a hugely diverse city, different types of people, and you all live, one of the richest people in town might live around the corner from somebody who's a housekeeper. It's not so stratified in economic ways as many other cities.
What about the history? I know slavery is something that is a shame of our past, but what is the history in New Orleans about slavery?
Well, slaves came early here, and it was a slave market. We've had several exhibits here on the slave thing, but a place called Armstrong Park now, after Louis Armstrong, was one of the slave trade markets. And it was, there were plantations all around here. One of the plantations around New Orleans, it's about an hour outside, called Whitney, is one of the few anywhere that is all about the slaves who lived in South Louisiana. So it makes it a different aspect from the ladies in the antebellum dresses and that sort of thing.
Yes, it's very important to have both to understand the past. Let me just ask you about two of the most well-known neighborhoods. The first one is the French Quarter, and we're all familiar with that one. What are some details you can tell us about that area?
Well, it's been rebuilt several times since the Great Fire, of course, was what year was that? I've forgotten. But the Great Fire in
1788.
1788 really knocked out most of the French Quarter, but it's been the heart of the city. It's high. It's the highest sea level point, so much of the city is under sea level. But when you come to New Orleans, the best thing to do is you just walk around. It's by the Mississippi River, and one of my favorite things to do is if I'm feeling bad someday, I may go to the quarter, and there's always a street band playing for quarters or something in front of St. Louis Cathedral and Jackson Square, and break dancers, and you really get caught up in the spirit of it, and everybody claps and that sort of fun. And then you can cross the street and get coffee and donuts, or as we used to say when I was growing up, we called them donuts. But as new people came in and wanted to change it, they got a little more hoity-toity and they started calling them beignets.
Oh, yes. The beignets of the Café du Monde, right.
And that's right across the street from where you see the street people. And you still see them actually a few feet down from the Café du Monde.
Isn't there a new riverfront park right in that area? Like the High Line in New York?
The moonwalk. You can walk along the moonwalk. Really, it's almost connected all the way back into some of the neighborhood Bywater, and Marigny, and to the to Canal Street. And there's a big aquarium at Canal Street, and but all along the river, it's really a nice way to walk. And it's called Moonwalk after Moon Landrieu, who was the mayor of New Orleans.
Oh, that's an interesting little fact. Yeah. I would have thought it was the moon. Let me ask you about the most posh district. I remember the Garden District, so beautiful. Makes me think of Tennessee Williams and, all the antebellum area. Tell me a little bit about that. I know that the universities are there, and
they're usually uptown. A Garden District and uptown are two different neighborhoods. The Garden District is between Jackson Avenue and Louisiana Avenue, and you have all these grand houses, but we don't have big yards like in other cities because the city is built between Lake Pontchartrain and the Mississippi River, so you don't have vast amounts of land anyway. So you'll have these enormous houses on really very small plots of land. But yes, that's where Anne Rice lived, the writer, and you just have all sorts of people, and they do walking tours. There's what's really good is Commander's Palace Restaurant is there, and that's one of the most popular restaurants in the city. And it's a half a block from an old cemetery, which you can tour. And then there's a place called the Rink, another half a block away, which is a small shopping center with a coffee shop downstairs, one of the really 2 or 3 small locally owned bookstores in the city, and several places. I say that if you only have a day and you want to go to Commander's for lunch, and then you tour the cemetery, which I think closes at 3, and then you go around the Rink and have a cup of coffee at the end. And it's sort of like a perfect little thing you could do in a short amount of time in New Orleans.
Sounds great. What about the National World War II Museum? I've heard a great deal about that. Very, very impressive.
Yeah, that's the number one attraction in the city. More people see that than anything else. And it was started by Stephen Ambrose, who was a historian at University of New Orleans. But some landing boats were by Higgins, and he was a New Orleanian, landing boats in World War II, which is how it started. And it really caught fever, whatever the word is. Anyway.
Caught on.
Caught on, yeah. So here I go. But people like Tom Hanks and all these movie stars got involved. And I remember Stephen Ambrose wrote a letter to the editor one time in New Orleans, to New Orleanians, and said, okay, all these people from California donating, you need to donate too. And I remember I sent $100 in, and then
You were shamed.
we were shamed into supporting it. But it's just really amazing and tells you so much about the war. And then there's shorter exhibits too, that traveling ones, like we have to be careful what happened in Germany when they were doing propaganda and doing it as news and that sort of thing. So, but it's a very active place that's quite interesting.
It gets a great reputation. When I was in France, people told me about it. When I was visiting the DJ Museum there in Normandy, they were mentioning how good the National World War II Museum was in New Orleans. How about outdoors? What about parks and gardens? Are there any you recommend?
Well, those are sort of my favorite things to do. When there's Audubon Park, which I just love. It's not too far. It's uptown. And Audubon Park begins on St. Charles Avenue, right across the street from Tulane University and Loyola University, which are next door to each other. And there's a statue of Jesus in front of Loyola University with his hands raised up, lifting toward the sky. And people who go to Tulane say, that's the statue is really saying, can I help it if there's a better school next door, which would be Tulane. So, but anyway, you can get off the streetcar there. Taking a tour of the city, of the other parts out of the quarter, is good to take a streetcar ride. You can get off at the Garden District, and then you can ride a little bit longer and get off at Audubon Park and walk through the park. It's a 1.9 mile loop. And what's so wonderful about it, besides the oak trees, and there's a lagoon, and there's an island with egrets on it and different birds all of the time. And there's one swan and one goose, and they're very good friends. And they're seen swimming together. But what I really like about it is they're fathers and children and families, and they're all together in Audubon Park. So it just seems peaceful when I'm there. It's just an amazing place. And then in City Park, which is larger, but I think if you live in that part of the city, you prefer City Park. And that's where the New Orleans Museum of Art is, which is a beautiful museum. And the Children's Museum, a new Children's Museum, which is fantastic, is open. But they have a sculpture garden next to the museum. And it is just phenomenal. There's a lagoon in there, bridges, and sculptures from people from all over the world, and just really is a first-class place to go. And they sometimes have yoga classes there in the morning. But just to wander around when you want to be by yourself, it's just great to do that.
Tell me a little bit about what we all think about Carnival and Mardi Gras. I'd like some inside information about the floats and all of that. You know all that.
Yeah, we do. We have our own language here. I mean, everybody in New Orleans, if you come here, you need to know what the words mean. The carnival organizations, and they're probably way over 100. They call themselves crews, Krewes. And the ones who have parades, they'll tell you, particularly in New Orleans, if a friend of yours is riding on a float, and these are all private organizations, so the members all pay to do this themselves. Friend will say, well, I'm on the neutral ground side or the sidewalk side. And a neutral ground is what we call medians. And even if there's no median on that street, we still know that that's the left side of the street. So it may be a street that doesn't have a neutral ground, but a friend will just say, yes, I'll be on the neutral ground side of Chaos, which is the name of a organization for men that does a satirical parade. But there are all sorts of them. And the deal is people throw thousands of dollars worth of trinkets, beads, and just different things to people. And somebody may be a good friend of yours, but he or she cannot give you the trinket ahead of time. You have to catch it from them on the street, even if they live next door or in the same house. So it's one of those really weird things. But this year, because of we had no Mardi Gras because of the pandemic, somebody went on Facebook one day, it was just a woman, and said, we ought to do house floats. Let's decorate our houses. And then some people there were a lot of float makers, that had lost business and the designers. And so it became a way to get them to get some jobs at people's houses. Well, within a few days, 9,000 people had signed up,
Oh my goodness.
even in Europe. And now people are just doing it. I mean, I've got a friend who just went places and bought things, but the places were sold out of the flowers and the jesters and the things that people were putting on their houses because so many people just absolutely love this idea. And
it sounds like something that you might be keeping just, to add to the parades. It's a wonderful idea.
I think we will, because people have spent a lot of money on things. And we have like Leah Chase, who was one of the wonderful chefs of New Orleans. She died a couple of years ago, but one relative of hers has a figure of her cooking on the upper balcony of his house, and steam's coming out of a pallet. And then we have Stacey Abrams is there's a Georgia house float with Stacey Abrams at the top.
Wow.
But then they're just fun. I mean, there's this one street called Harmony Street, and every house on that street has something to do with harmony, music, art.
Wow.
It's amazing. So I think we will. And the other
it sounds like it's one of those things that makes New Orleans what we all love. Yeah.
It shows the resilience of the city.
Absolutely.
And I think it really will last because again, they've spent so much money on it, and everybody now, we all just ride around all the time. You began with a list, and then you discovered the list. There are 15 other houses, but there aren't on the list, and within 2 blocks. So on Facebook now, that's basically everybody's showing. Look, I got 72 pictures here of house floats. And you want to know where they are. So
we can all share. We can all go on and look. That sounds fabulous. Let me ask you a little bit about the music of New Orleans. There's traditional New Orleans jazz. And where would we find that?
Well, Preservation Hall is still about the best place to find traditional jazz. There's not too much of it you can find in the city. And it's so that that's a place off next to Pat O'Brien's, which is maybe the city's most famous bar, and it's off of Bourbon Street. And then you just have on Frenchman Street, right behind the French Quarter, are all sorts of music clubs. And they usually have a blackboard outside of saying who's performing, because different local performers go from club to club and perform. And there's also right across the street from, in the middle of it, there's an open air market at night that you can go to. I had some friends in town and we all bought necklaces made out of zippers, but they have really kind of fun things that they sell at that market.
Wow.
So it's nice, but there's just different types of music. We have blues. I mean, Fats Domino is from here, and Alan Toussaint, and then, Ernie Cato, and just a million people that, and right now Tank and the Bangas, they're a hot number, and Kermit Ruffins. So you just have all sorts of types of music. And
about the food?
And the food, I know. Well, you can go on and on and on.
Tell me, it's a mix. I mean, when I went there, I've been a couple of times to New Orleans. It's just everybody talks about food. Everybody loves food. There's a mix of these wonderful Creole, soul, French, Cajun, whatever. It's just super, super delicious stuff. What would be your what 2 places perhaps, or 3 would you say try not to miss, maybe that we wouldn't know about?
Well, I think the tradition, of course, the new restaurants come in and everybody has to go see the new restaurants, but New Orleanians tend to stay more with the ones that we've known for years. Couple of them are uptown. They're not in the quarter. Clancy's and Upper Line are 2 restaurants that are very, very popular with locals. And so is Brightson's. Brightson was a chef with Paul Prudhomme when he first opened. And Paul's has shut down with the pandemic for good. It's not going to open again. But anyway, those 3 are really terrific. And also Dookie Chase, even though Leah Chase died, what you would do is you would go to Dookie Chase, and a lot of the civil rights meetings were held in that restaurant. She was a Black woman and married into this family that had a sandwich shop, and she turned it into a white tablecloth restaurant where Black and white people could meet together and have their civil rights discussions. And you would end your meal there by going to say hello to Leah in the kitchen. And she was in the kitchen until about 2 months before she died. And she was in her mid-90s and she was still cooking. And she
I remember seeing her, I think on 60 Minutes and many shows. She's a
she
very
was just
famous ambassador for New Orleans. Yeah.
wonderful.
Have you
But
met her?
yes, we'd all go down. I have so many pictures of me and my friends with her because I always took friends there to meet her too and to eat the food. It's it's old Creole food, black food. You would have red beans and rice, fried seafood. But the big treat was meeting Leah. But her family is still running it, and it's a lovely restaurant, and it has lots and lots of black art in it. There's a picture of Obama in there and Bush in there. With and I think she gave some food or served some food to the Pope. I'm not positive about that.
I wonder what he had.
Maybe that was Antoine's did the same thing, I think. And Antoine's is the oldest restaurant in the city from the same family. And it's been there amazing. But Brennan's and Commander's, and there's just really so many amazing restaurants. There really are.
Right. I remember, well, the podcast is called Places I Remember. So I always end with personal memories of the place we're discussing. And I have just the best memory of New Orleans because I think it was the first trip I ever took by myself. I was 19. I took the train from Miami. We must have switched trains in Tallahassee or somewhere up there. And I just remember all these places you're talking about, Antoine's and Cafe Du Monde for the beignets and Brennan's for bananas Foster. A lot of it was food, but also just walking around. It seemed like I was in another country. At that time, I had never been to another country, and it was the closest thing I had ever been to some place that was so, so special and different. And I will always remember that as probably my first great memory of travel. Now, you have a million memories of New Orleans. I would like to ask you what your favorite one is to share with us today.
Well, I have one that people like to hear because it's kind of funny. As I told you, there are a million carnival balls here, and you have the social ones the debutantes are in. Then you have that's maybe 15, but the rest of them, every different group in the city has its own carnival ball. And they're some are men's crews and some are women's and some are mixtures. And I was queen of two balls. One when I was in college, and that was where your family, if your family has some connection, somebody in college is queen, and a member of the ball who's much older is the king. But when I was 13, I was queen of something called the Children's Carnival Club that my grandmother helped found with two other women. And my king was 12. So we were 12 and 13, a very precocious age. And he wore a blonde page boy wig and white tights underneath his tunic. And I think he had elevator shoes on because I was tall at the time. And I had a ponytail through my crown in the back. And what's really interesting about this is that the organization is almost 100 years old now, and we are the only king and queen to ever get married. And we married in our mid-30s.
Oh, so my goodness. Really sort of does he still have a blonde page boy?
And I don't know. No, it's gray and sort of going away now.
Well, nobody can top that memory. That's fantastic. Anyway, look, thank you so much, Millie. It's been a wonderful discussion about New Orleans. I learned a lot, and I will hope to go back because it's a great city. So thank you.
Well, I enjoyed talking to you. Really, it's fun to talk about my favorite city because, I've traveled a whole lot, and I'm always glad when I come home because there really is no place in the world like New Orleans. No place.
Yep. If you have any comments or questions about New Orleans, about this or any episode, just contact me at placesirememberleahlane.com. Thanks for listening to our award-winning podcast. We've recorded over 100 episodes of Places I Remember, so follow us on any podcast app. And new monthly episodes are also on YouTube with gorgeous video. My book, Places I Remember, is available in print and Kindle, and I read the audio version. Follow my travel writing at Forbes.com. Contact me at the links in the show notes or on my website, placesirememberlealane.com, and keep making your own travel memories.